Good morning and welcome to the amazing, original Loretta Brown Show. What do you think of that, Benny?
She's back. I've always loved your intros.
Thank you.
Always loved your intros.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I got back from Egypt, and then we had Thanksgiving.
And in between that, we figured out which way the Nile ran.
We did.
Mm-hmm.
It runs
the opposite way we think.
That's right. That's right. I got that figured out, though.
Because we learned things. We learned things a lot. Quite often.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I am a lifelong learner. That's my
Not just you.
My mantra.
Not just you. I think a lot of people
can learn things, and you're going to learn some amazing things today. You're going to be so glad you tuned in. If you're out there driving around, be careful. And Benny, I just got this new car, and it tells me now if there's someone in my blind spot.
I was going to say, it's like it tells you when it rains.
No.
It's going to be going off quite a bit here in the Seattle area.
It does. It does do that.
Warning, droplets ahead.
Yeah.
Warning,
exactly.
droplets ahead.
Anyway, this is radio to open the heart, heal the soul, and awaken the consciousness, which is off to the side this morning.
You've named your new car, right?
Pegasus.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, that's right.
I know.
Double checking.
I know. My old car was Betsy, good old Betsy, but my new car is Pegasus, and she's red. I'm just saying, like a phoenix. I know. It's my motto. It's happening. I know it's scary, but there it is. We can all learn something new, and we can start our day new and change our attitude anytime we want, and it's not always easy. But I hope everybody had a great Thanksgiving, and I hope you enjoyed listening to all the encore presentations of my show, because I really am back, and I've got a great lineup of guests, starting with my guest today, who I'm going to be secretive unless you've been trolling me on Facebook, then you'll know.
We know who you are.
That's right. And I hate to say this, but how many shopping days till that big day in December? 26?
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah. I'm online right now doing something in between my shows. Yep.
Yeah, and just some announcements. I am the owner of Reiki Oasis, located right here in the greater Seattle area for the last 23 to 24 years. Whew. I'm only 29. How did that happen? Anyway, the Temple of Divine Feminine, which is my monthly workshop with women, where we go into the ancient mysteries for the feminine and the masculine, because, come on, we have both, is Saturday, December 8th. We're going to have a great, great class. Last month, or when I got back from Egypt, I started a 9-month series with everybody, kind of came out of my journey to Egypt. So, sign up for that at schedule.reikioasis.com. And then at the end of every year, I do sacred ceremony to kind of wash away the old year and set the energies for the new year. And these are called despachos, or prayer bundles. They're very small. I only let 16 people in for each one, because my space is set up that way. And this year they will be on the evening of December 26th. Or the evening of December 27th, and you will need to get signed up early because they do fill up, and you can do that at schedule.reikioasis.com. And please be aware, you don't come to both of them, you just sign up for one of them. And these are powerful ceremonies. I was initiated into this quite a few years ago now, and every year people give me amazing stories of what happens when we purposefully, with intention, set ourselves up to be creators or co-creators of our life for the next year. So come on out. I'd love to have you come. We always have a really good time, and it does change people's lives. I also want to thank all of my supporters. I am a listener-supported show, and here I am on the air. Just turn on your radio, and here I am. And, of course, all these shows are archived. You can download them and listen for hours and hours and hours, which is what my daughter tells me she does. She just has mom's voice going in the background. That's creepy, but there it is. Sending her love. I love you. Anyway, aloha to you over there in Kona. A little bit of astrology, just a tiny bit, because I want to spend the hour with my guest. So this week, we've been seeing action from Lucky Jupiter, who has been illuminating the truth about the direction that things are headed. And I do realize sometimes the truth is a beautiful thing, and sometimes the truth just says, maybe I need to adjust that a little bit. So retrograde Mercury is here, which has been bringing past ideas back to light. And I always think Mercury retrograde gets a bad rap. It's not a bad thing to take a look at past ideas and reevaluate them and clean things up and move on. Tomorrow, Friday, love and money planet Venus is going to face off with Uranus, the planet of surprises. So there will be some tension between our need to be independent and what we value in our relationships. And we'll be confronted with a decision that absolutely has to be made. And remember that a relationship can be the one with yourself. So this will be the third time in the past 3 months that aspect has occurred in the sky. So its effects are drawn out and subtle. For clues as to what themes are recurring, look to what happened the last time Venus faced off with Uranus. The first time was September 12th. The second time was October 31st. And now it's coming up again on November 30th, which is tomorrow. And just when you all thought Scorpio season was over, retrograde Mercury re-enters Scorpio at 6:12 a.m. on Saturday, which will cause us to lower our voices and be more receptive to what others have to say instead of speaking over everyone like Mercury and Sagittarius has been encouraging us to do. And doesn't that sound like a good thing, actually? So post-retrograde Venus makes its way forward into Scorpio again on Sunday at around noon, and it will fill the air with romantic obsession. So you could draw in somebody extremely loyal to you and loving in your relationship, or it could bring up that old wrong thing they did to you, and you're like, I'm done with that forever.
I knew it.
But, it's okay.
Yeah.
Sometimes you got to make a choice.
Uh-huh.
Got to get cleaned up and move on and make room for love and money.
Yeah.
Are you
Gotta do
getting?
this.
Yeah.
Wipe your hands from it. Get away.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it could be a bit intense. The sun squares off with Mars on Sunday, inspiring an impulse to explore our emotional depths, which I always think is healing, and possibly launching home improvement projects. Yeah.
Looking at the season, you might want to act kind of fast on that. My neighbor had to do that, actually.
Did they?
They had a little bit of a backup on their system.
Oh.
So the front yard was torn up.
Ah.
But they got it done in like a couple hours.
So they've got it done.
It's an emergency thing.
It's emergency.
Yeah.
So remember that we're always greater than the stars, but we do have a reflection between heaven and earth. And, of course, I'm an energy girl, vibrational frequency girl, so I talk about that a lot. You're going to be so happy now with what I'm going to do because I'm going to bring my guest on. And if you've ever visited a sacred site, such as the pyramids in Egypt or Stonehenge or Machu Picchu, and you may have experienced something that is difficult to explain, such as what happened with my group recently. What is the purpose of sacred sites? Why are they here? And what benefit do they have to modern men and women, or do they? And is it possible for a temple to transform an ordinary person into an extraordinary being? We're going to explore that more with my amazing guest today, Freddy Silva, best-selling author, leading researcher of ancient civilizations, of restricted or alternative history, sacred sites, and their interaction with consciousness. We're going to be discussing information from his new book, The Divine Blueprint, Temples, Power Places, and the Global Plan to Shape the Human Soul. I love that title. Welcome to the show, Freddy. It's so great to have you.
Good morning, Loretta.
Good morning. Well, the name of your book alone is a mouthful and raises so. And I also want all my listeners to know, because we have a little webcam that watches me while I'm on the it's that camera. Okay, there's two of them. And I have so many of your things here, and I'm telling people right off the bat, I am totally a Freddy Silva groupie. I'm disgusting, and he has 5 or 6 books that I have little tabs all over them and yellow highlights. And
Yeah, put your shrine away. Put your shrine away.
I know, I've got your picture on my altar with a candle.
I better get a police escort when I arrive in Seattle on Saturday.
Careful.
But I love your information, and I pore over it, and then I pore over it again. You have done such excellent research with your books and your DVDs, and of course you're going to be in Seattle Saturday, which I'm just going to keep saying over and over again. But I want to ask you, I used to live in the Middle East. I lived there for 9 years, and I think I've always been interested in traipsing around old dusty sites, with big stones. What got you into this? What pulled you, and were you always drawn to taking a look at megalithic sites?
Yeah, I mean, it was sort of a combination of curiosity and not really accepting that what I was being told was the truth. There was something quite hollow about the way that we projected history. And sure enough, if you sit down with enough people who are historians or academics or geologists or archaeologists for that matter, they'll confide in you and say that the paradigm that they've constructed over the last 200 years doesn't hold up. And there's so many people, hopefully like myself, trying to sort of bring new understanding to what these places really were about that is really making them very uncomfortable, which is why we get so much short shrift from them. But that's okay, because a good colleague of mine who passed away last year called John Anthony West, who's written some marvelous work on Egypt, he called them quackademics. So there's a bit of back and forth between them. But, I mean, I was drawing pyramids when I was 3, so I guess I had an obsession, but even back then. I just got sidetracked by modern life, and I wanted to be a rock star, but never in my wildest years would I have ever imagined that the rocks I would be promoting would be large upright rocks instead of a guitar. So there's a bit of a cosmic joke in there somewhere. So, but yes, I did really enjoy just going around looking, staring the pot with a stick and saying, what is this really about? And as soon as you ask these questions, you do start getting involved into a lot of research, and then you start understanding what these places really were for and what they're doing for you, and more importantly, what they're doing to you, which is what I find even more interesting.
I love what you just said about being a rock star, because you are a rock star, and because I'm a groupie.
I had the hair back then, darling. I had the hair back then.
Oh, you don't. Never mind. I'll tell you in person. You look great without hair. Don't worry about it. Right? It's overrated.
It took Patrick Stewart a while to get over that one himself, but if Patrick Stewart can handle it, I can handle it.
That's right. That's absolutely right. Yeah. I'm laughing because years ago I had a meditation where my guidance said something about you're going to be doing rock concerts. So when you said that, I giggled and I went, yeah, I get it. It's not that kind of rock. Now, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just saying the universe has a very unique sense of humor. It really does.
It does.
I have a lot of friends who are some of the best psychics in the world. And on occasion, we have a chance to tune in and get some information, and they tell us what we need to do. We're here to be part of the service. And at the same time, we have a chance to ask questions back. And the humor that they use is quite incredible. I mean, they really do look down upon us and think that, things are kind of heavy down here.
Mm-hmm.
And we take ourselves a little bit too seriously sometimes. And they do like to pull your leg once in a while. So it just tells you that, everything needs to be taken with a little pinch of salt, and you should just sort of lighten up about things and enjoy life a bit more.
Yes, I agree with you. I find that, when I connect with the universe and all that is, that quite often they do wordplay with me,
Oh, yeah.
And it's hysterical because you can't make this stuff up. I don't think I'm that, clever in the moment. And then out comes this stuff, and I'm like, oh, that was good. That was super good.
And you take credit for it. You don't
I
give
do.
them credit.
Yeah. Yeah, I do. Now, in your book, you say, and I'm going to quote from page 14 in your book, The Divine Blueprint. You say, far from being dead and forgotten, ancient temples are as alive as the day they were built. And anyone who has visited Stonehenge or Saqqara, not as a tourist, but as a pilgrim, understand this. Temples are first seen and then felt. And it is through that feeling that the soul of the universe extends its pen and inscribes the clay tablet that is man. That is a powerful and wonderful quote. And what do you mean the temples are alive and that we need to feel them?
Oh, yes. And we sort of, once we inhabit a human body, we start to get caught up in that wonderful mechanism called sight. And we start taking the visual aspect of things very importantly. You know, that woman is very attractive, or that car is really attractive, and that building is really big, so I'm going to go for that. That's not what it's about. It's about the quality of things. And I think the ancients really knew this as part of the understanding of what it means to separate your soul from your ego. And one of the things that they were very clever about was the way in which they designed these buildings, first of all, to get your attention. And I'm going to use the Great Pyramid and the three pyramids of Giza as an example, because we all know what we're talking about here. And everybody's seduced by the big pyramid. Not everybody likes going in there. It's kind of funny watching a group of people, and suddenly you go there, you've paid $3,000 to show up, and you arrive at the face of the Great Pyramid, and you go, I really don't want to go into that one. I want to go into the one next door. And I asked them, well, why? They're both pyramids. You know, they got entrances facing north. They're pretty much built the same way. Of course, I know a little bit differently. They're not built the same way. And people are seduced by these two massive pyramids. But yet, the most important one is the little pyramid, and hardly anyone ever gets to go there. And that's part of the reason why I really look at temples as being living organisms, that they speak to you. And if your antennas are a bit more developed, you pick up on this. You let go of the visual aspect of things, and you begin to realize that things are not quite what they seem. There was a wonderful thing that was done years ago, I want to say about 25 years ago at Princeton University. They actually were looking at this exact same thing, whereby they asked themselves, are the temples just the sum of the parts of the stones and the colors and the design? And they finally realized that no, actually there's something else going on underneath them. And that is that they developed a mechanism, kind of like a computer, which they could carry around with them, and they were able to measure the background frequency of any environment relative to the amount of consciousness that's inputted into it. So let's say you and I go and sit and meditate in the Walmart car park. The machine is not going to generate a very high level of sensitivity towards that, because they'll pick up your meditation, and there's nothing else sacred about a car park. Now, when they took the same people and put them in Wyoming next to Devil's Tower, which is a very powerful sacred place, the machine suddenly begins to register a very high frequency. Now, when they went off to the pyramids and various temples in Egypt, they recognized that not only did the temples by themselves register the highest effects measurable of energy anywhere in the world, but when you put people anywhere near them in a meditative state, the readings went off the scale. And that's what I mean about the temples being living organisms. They sort of grab your attention, and you go, okay. But then they begin to work you, and they have their own frequency. They have their own radio station. Just you are your own radio station, and they lock into you. And as soon as you find a connection between you and the temple, you begin to go to the small pyramid and not the big pyramid, and then you start having those wonderful experiences, because these places are electromagnetic, and so are you. So once the frequencies match, the temple starts working on you, and that's when it's important to be in a very receptive state, because the more you do that, the least you expect anything to happen, the more magic occurs, I find. If you go there expecting something, it won't happen. It just never works that way. It's back to that sense of humor. But I think if you just put yourself in a quiet state, just walk in and say, what's this about? Ask a question, and before you realize it, you come back a week later, and you're a completely different person. And that's how they design this stuff around the world. It doesn't have to be in Egypt. It can be in America. Most of the mounds of the Mississippi Valley are hardwired in exactly the same way. There's hardly anyone buried in these places. They're just places that where the mounds are telling you there's a special energy at this place, because they built this for a time, in our time, when they recognized we could not see or feel this energy. They had to tell you where the energy is so you can go and stand on it and remember who you are. So it's very important when you approach these places to go and admire them as living organisms, which are very sensitive. They're very easily offended. So the trick is to honor them for what they are. And believe me, the relationship that you gain and the amount of information that you gain from the relationship is beyond your wildest dreams.
Well, what you're saying has so much in it. It's very rich. the idea that these temples are, and I'll just say temples because it's also power places and things like that, but that they are alive and that we interact with them. And I guess my question is then, and maybe it's a statement rather than a question. So, so these are purposely placed on the planet where they're
Oh,
at.
absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, wherever you go, without exception, the temples are always placed on the crossing points of the Earth's telluric currents, what most people call the energy lines or fairy paths or lungmei, dragon lines. Every culture has its own method of calling this, but we now have the mechanical devices to be able to measure this energy, and there's one that was done in England. Everything seems to be done in England when it comes to science and sacred space for some reason. They actually took what they call a magnetometer. It's a big $40,000 machine which you drag along the ground, and you get a computer printout of things that you can't see. One of my favorites is the Rollright Stone Circle just outside Oxford, and it shows very clearly the stones in the circle. And there's three stones that deviate from the circle, which form a kind of entrance, or the entrance, as I like to call it. Because the moment you actually drag the machine through the landscape, it begins to reveal the energy line that's actually being dragged through the entrance, and it goes in a spiral right into the center of the actual stone circle. So we now have the ability to see this energy and how it behaves in a simple stone circle, but it behaves just like that anywhere in the world. In Machu Picchu, if you go to the sacred center, you've got at least 6 energy lines that congregate at the very top stone. So these things are not just designed to harness the energy, they also are placed deliberately on the Earth's acupuncture points. So that in itself is a second layer of energy that you've just compiled there. And then you've also got to look at the big picture. If you just sort of take a big wide-angle lens and move out of the planet and look at all the ancient sacred sites, and specifically the oldest places on Earth, and you put them on a little pin on the map, and you begin to realize they're also mathematically related to each other in a very specific grid that is actually based on the Earth's great year. Not to get too much into mathematics, this is first. I know this is 3 hours earlier in Seattle, so I'm not going to bore you with mathematics, but it's based on the Earth's precessional cycle of 26,000 years. So we're talking about some very high level of understanding here. There was a design grid that was put here at least as far as I can figure out 11,000 years ago. And again, it was designed to last, because you've got to wonder, why were they using rocks that were so big and so cumbersome when bricks would have done, or wooden posts? And of course, the answer is that they wanted this to survive into a time when they knew that we would lose the plot. They wanted these places to become kind of self-help centers, as I call them, so that when you forget who you are and what you're doing here, you go to these places and you suddenly remember who you are and where you've come from and where you're going. They're the easiest, the most cheapest visit to a doctor I can possibly imagine. I totally recommend it.
So 11,000 years. And so there's something in that cycle of 11,000 years. Something happened 11,000 years ago that.
Yeah, we're basically, in fact, I'm just putting the finishing touches to my new book, which deals with an ancient civilization. I really wanted to do things very easy for myself. I think I'm going to go look for missing civilization from 11,000 years ago before the flood. And it's turned out to be one of the biggest books I've actually written so far. So that should be out by March. But essentially, we were hit by the fragments of a disintegrating comet in 9,703 BC. We now have the evidence of where these fragments are. We have the geological samples. We have the ice core data that pins this moment in time where the Earth literally was destroyed. This is the moment of the Great Flood. And I've gone through 180 different flood myths around the world, and they literally are eyewitness accounts by the survivors. And one of the most dramatic, in fact, two of them, there was people in Tibet who talk about the ocean encroaching into the Himalaya. Anybody who's been to the Himalaya knows how far away from the ocean that is, and it's also 3 miles up. So they're talking about the waves reaching the Himalaya, and also in the Cascades, where you are, and the Olympic Peninsula. There's 3 local tribes who also talk about being inundated by very fast encroaching tsunamis, which actually overwhelmed and went right through the Rockies and the Cascades to the point where one of their canoes ended up on top of Mount Jefferson, which is 12,000 It was quite a scary read, actually. If you can survive the first chapter, you'll be doing very well. But the point is that there was the Egyptians said there was a second civilization here that worked not in tandem with humans. They kept themselves to themselves. They seemed to be living on islands. And they were the ones who built all the temples. And the idea was that the survivors, and they usually go by various names, the Shining Ones, the Watchers, are usually a very common term that's used around the world for these people. They were basically demigods. They were half human, half divine. And their charge was to rebuild the former mansions of the gods after the flood. And suddenly, in 8,500 BC, literally within 700 years of the Great Flood, we have all across the earth a flowering of civilization. Suddenly, humans developed agriculture, animal husbandry. They developed architecture, megalithic construction, literally in the blink of an eye. I mean, this does not happen evolutionarily. There is no precedent. And it's quite certain that we were helped by people who are already here, who survived this extraordinary event, and it was their idea to rebuild civilization. And they taught us what we know today, and they basically went on their merry way. So one of the things that they did was to try and rebuild these temples to show humans how to live in harmony with each other, because the temples are all mirror images of the perfection of nature and also the heavens. That's why we love going to them. That's why we look at them with great admiration. They look perfect because they are perfect. You can take any of these temples apart and figure out the perfect mathematics of nature. So there's the relationship. This all came from a people who already had thousands of years of understanding the cycles of the sky and nature, and they hardwired the information to the very fabrics of the buildings.
So they are living. I'm really hearing what you're saying. So they're actually more than libraries, like you say, remembering who we are, connecting into the energies and frequencies of that, and how to live in harmony with the earth and all that is here, maybe even the cosmos.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
In fact, there was another search that was done recently, and it was archaeoacoustical research, and some people who work with sound frequencies, they went and measured the frequencies of the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid. They also went to the Hypogeum in Malta. They went to a couple of sites in Britain and Ireland, and they're all very different. But here's the funny thing. All the frequencies they found in these temples were exactly the same. And it was a frequency of around 112 hertz. Now, we had no idea what that meant until a neurosurgeon looks at the information and says, well, wait a minute, that is the frequency. It's like a switch. And that frequency, when you throw it at a person, it literally switches their left brain processing and moves the frequency of the brain over to your right brain to be in a receptive state. Oh. So that was the big aha moment. The temples really are working on you, because they are literally designed, regardless of what they look like, they are all designed to get you to stop thinking and get you to start feeling. Now, that was a huge discovery, and it was only made about 5 years ago.
That is so powerful. We're going to take a station break because we need to, unfortunately.
That powerful. We have to take a break.
It's so powerful enough to catch my
breath. Do not operate your car.
Yeah, don't do that while you're listening. This is Loretta Brown. My guest today is Freddy Silva. He is an author of so many books. We're talking about his book, The Divine Blueprint. And also, we're going to open the lines after the break. If you've got a question for Freddy Silva, this is an amazing opportunity to call in and ask that question. The number is 425-373-5527 or 1-888-298-5569. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
Ready now, I ain't gonna fall back now. All right, I'm take it on me, baby.
Energy is powerful. It's all around us, mysterious, full of potential. Directing positive, healing energy to raise your vibrational rate through Reiki can change your life. Reiki Master Loretta Brown has relieved stress, sadness, anger, and even helped clients lose weight, stop smoking, and end sleep disorders. Worldwide, people have sought out Reiki Oasis. If you want help with your dis-ease, visit ReikiOasis.com. Harness life's energy Visit ReikiOasis.com today.
When you look at me, you might see
my tremor,
my lack of facial expression,
a person with Parkinson's disease.
But you may not see that I have trouble sleeping.
that no two treatment plans are the same.
I was diagnosed at 65.
37, earlier than most.
But if you look closer,
You'll see
A warrior mom,
an endurance athlete, someone who is still dancing.
someone with a lot of fight.
Every 9 minutes, someone is diagnosed with Parkinson's disease.
and every one of them can turn to the American Parkinson Disease Association.
For education,
For community,
For support,
Look closer.
and you'll see
my resolve
My determination.
my spirit
is unshakable.
Visit apdaparkinson.org to learn more and show your support today.
Alternative Talk 1150. We're on your radio at 1150 a.m. We're on your HD radio at 98.9 Channel 3.
So many ways to listen.
We're on the web at 1150kknw.com, streaming live audio and video as well as MP3 archives of many of our shows.
So many ways to listen.
And now, we're on your smartphone or tablet. Download our free app in the Apple App Store or Google Play and take Alternative Talk 1150 anywhere you go.
So many ways to listen.
Radio with no added hormones or preservatives. All natural Alternative Talk 1150 a.m.
All right, I'm taking on me, take it on me, baby. All right, I ever ask, are you gonna be my lover tonight? But take it with me, What if I left and it made no sense?
Welcome back to the original Loretta Brown Show, and my guest today, Freddy Silva, who is Silva. Excuse me. I don't know. I gave you an element there.
He's gleaming.
Freddy.
He's bright.
Because
Hey,
you're
you
one of
found
the
the Jewish
shining
in me.
ones. Hello.
Found the Jewish in him. That's fine.
Oy vey, you found the Jewish in me.
That's good.
I think you are one of the shining ones, but anyway, that
I was actually born at the base of a hill in Portugal where actually there was a group of very interesting people that actually escaped the flood 11,000 years ago, and they came all the way from a missing land in the Atlantic. We know what they're talking about. And they're called the Shining People, the people of the serpent. And the funny thing is, if you talk to a wisdom keeper in Yucatan, they have exactly the same story. And they call them the Itza out there, from where we get the term Chichen Itza from. So it is amazing, actually, what's going on.
that's fascinating. That's really, really fascinating to me. I want to remind my listeners, I did open the lines. They are open in case you want to call in and ask Freddy Silva. Freddie Silver. I don't know. Maybe that's your rock star name. If you'd like to ask him a question about megaliths and temples, the quest for the other world, lost lands, ancient architects, anything like that, give us a call at 425-373-5527 or 1-888-298-5569. And I want to ask you because, I have had these experiences where I go in and have what I call unexplained experiences inside these temples. And you have experienced this. Can you talk a little bit about maybe the Great Pyramid and what happened in there?
One.
And any others, because I'm open to, because I'm love to hear that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's when I was sort of doing this quest, I'm learning as I'm writing. I sort of don't pretend to be a major expert in anything. I don't think anybody is an expert on this subject because we're constantly learning and picking up new information. It's such a huge topic. And part of what I enjoy looking back at it with hindsight is how little I knew when I thought I knew so much. And one of the great benefits is the fringe benefits, as I call it. And the Great Pyramid experience is certainly one that it stayed with me forever. It really does, because I wasn't expecting this to happen, nor did I know it was even possible back then, but now I know very differently. What happened was that we were going to do some work with about 16 people. I belonged to a group, like many groups around the world, that quietly go around fixing the nonsense that people do at temples, because, again, they're living organisms. They breathe. You can measure the frequency of the temple. It wakes up in the morning. It goes to sleep in the evening, just like we do. And so, of course, you take all your junk in there, all your emotion, and it's going to remember it. So people like us go there and clean it up so that the next group can feel, there's wonderful aha moments. for some reason, half of us couldn't make it in there. It was just one of those bureaucratic mix-ups that you often find in Egypt. So only 4 of us were able to get into the Great Pyramid, and we didn't have private access. Now, if you've been in there without private access, it's mayhem. The building is so finely tuned that you drop a pin and you get a headache. The sound just reverberates everywhere. You have to be very quiet in there. And there's people running up and down the Grand Gallery and echoes everywhere, and you think, my God, I mean, what have we signed up for? And we go into the King's Chamber, and suddenly everybody's left the building. We thought, wow, that's a great opportunity. Let's get some work done and do it quickly so that before anybody else arrives. Well, then the lights went off. So we're in the dark, 4 of us, complete darkness, and there's nobody around. And we began to tone and sort of get the rhythm of the building going and do the things that we've been taught to do to clear sacred space. Next thing I saw was about 30 people coming out of the stones as clearly as I'm looking at my desk right now. And they're very tall. They're about 7.5 feet tall, 8 feet, dressed in these beautiful sort of white satin cloths like monks' cowls. Very elegant people. And they just surrounded us. And I just kept toning, and it's totally pitch dark. And, I don't know how long this went on for, 10, 15 minutes? I don't know. But then the lights went off, and there's a very angry Arab person somewhere at the bottom of the Great Pyramid telling us to get up because we weren't supposed to have this experience in there without paying $8,000. And I figured, well, let's just take some 5 minutes each to sit inside the box. So we did that. And then we came out of the building. We were all dazed. And incredibly, for once, there's actually 4 guys. Usually I'm the token guy in all of these groups. We actually have 4 guys. Very unusual. And it's clear that one of us wanted to say something, but we're too guy to talk about it. And I said, okay, I'll go first. Did anybody see what I saw in there? And everybody said exactly the same thing. They all saw what I saw as well. So it wasn't a figment of my imagination. The building literally still maintains the frequency where the memory of the people that used to work in there is still in there. It's still a portal. People do come in and out all the time. And I thought that this was an original experience until I went to my library at home. I was writing the Divine Blueprint, and I thought, I wonder if anybody else has had the same experience, because it would be great to back it up with someone else's opinion. And there's a guy called Paul Brunton back in the 20s who, incredibly enough, had enough of modern life in the 1920s, if you can believe this. He gives up his wonderful life in England, goes walkabout, goes to the sacred sites as a skeptic, and he's written some of the best spiritual books about anything you want to know about India or the Middle East or any other part of the world. And he actually did go to the Great Pyramid. He spent the whole night in there, and he had exactly the same experience. He talks about the same people in exactly the same description that I gave. And it's like the 2 stories literally came from the same person. And I'm glad I didn't read that before I wrote my experience or had the experience, because it would have gone into my head, and I probably would have manufactured it out of my imagination. But no, this is a real thing. And I've also had a friend of mine who's done acoustical research in the Great Pyramid, a scientist, very, straight matter of the fact. He's a very spiritual guy, but he won't admit it in front of people because, he's got that engineer out front. And he wants to be, he wants his papers to be written and published, so he doesn't talk about spiritual things. And he said, you know what, if you don't use my name in the book, yes, when we do hit certain frequencies inside the Great Chamber, people do come out of the stones, and it's very weird watching people watching you doing your work, and it's such a wonderful feeling because you feel very loved. Actually, they're very benevolent, but they're very, very tall, and they're dressed in the most sort of luminous white gowns, but they're very real. So I'm not the only one, and this happens in a lot of places around the world. The spirit of place is very much alive at each place.
Thank you for sharing that story, because I've experienced it, just letting you know, and I've also experienced the portals, and that was, like you say, I'm really glad these things happened before I had done any research, because I had no backdrop for the experience.
Exactly.
Right? And
it makes it so much more valid, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's startling, actually. It's like, okay, so what just happened, and who can I talk to about that, right?
Yeah, people go home completely changed. I mean, I had another group that I took,
Yeah.
and this time I actually took a group with me to the Great Pyramid, and most of them didn't know about my experience. I don't really advertise that very much. And because I want them to have their own experience.
Well,
It's very important.
I
It's a
agree.
personal journey.
Mhm.
Following me is not going to do you any good. You're on your own journey. If something I say is useful, that's fantastic. But at the same time, I was tuning the building, and I got them prepared, and I saw the same people coming out of the stones. And each one of them went round the back of all the people there. There were 16 people, and these people basically stood behind them and opened their arms. And I figured, I hope someone is not thinking of falling over backwards and cracking their heads on the floor. The word lawsuit suddenly flashes up. And you know what? Afterwards, we had a nice quiet dinner. And I said, does anybody feel comfortable in sharing any experiences? Because, part of what I enjoy is listening to other people's experiences. And you know what? Half the people in that group said, the moment you finished the toning, I felt someone came up behind me, very tall, and they spread their arms, and I felt like I could fall backwards and I would be totally protected. So they felt it, and they saw it as well. So it can happen to anyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I so agree with you. Everybody is on their own journey. They're going to have their own experience, but to be open to this idea of, what is here? What is this about? What does it have for me? Because, like you say, you can't actually recreate these events. It's not. I'm just going to say this. It's not a circus. This is real. This is real. And
it all depends on where you are as well in life, what's
Mm-hmm.
relative to you and what's relative to the group in general. So it's always I have a tool of a box full of tools that I use, but you know what? I get to these places and I just throw the stuff away and start from scratch because every situation is always different. If you go in with a preconceived notion, you're bound to be surprised, and they'll pull the carpet from under you. And that's what I enjoy about my work. It's always growing. It's always learning from scratch and learning to accept that you don't know everything and let the temple, inspire you. And then, before you realize it, you've written 300 pages of information and you take credit for it. But that's how it works. That's part of the magic. It's part of the understanding of, working with the human psyche. As I've said before, a group of people who knew how to work with the psyche to help you understand where you've come from and where you're going, to give you a better footing of where you are in this life. Because, we're so distracted, and especially today with cell phones and, fake media and all of this stuff. It's really distracting our attention from the big picture, which is what are you doing here? So, going to these sacred places is fundamental to just getting away from all this and going back to the basics of what is so important and what drives you in life. And every single time you do it, you come back completely refreshed. Just like going for a walk in the Olympic Peninsula, you come back completely refreshed into Seattle, and you suddenly forget about all the problems in the world. The important thing is where you are in life. Don't worry about everybody else. Where are you, and what are you doing with it, and how can you leave the planet in a better place than when you found it?
Right. Well, I have so many questions that we're not going to get to, but I want to. We talked a little bit about the break in the break, and I've been thinking about this because, you have a great DVD called Temple Making, and you've got, other worlds. You've got this great information, and I have a tendency to go to ancient sites and study all these dusty old books. Like, that's my favorite thing. Find some dusty old book and stick my nose in it. And, and then, yeah, you're there with me. I know.
You
and then
smell the, the damp in the page. Yes.
I travel back in time, and I'm a man with. Never mind. But anyway,
yeah, we can go for an hour and a half.
Thank you. Yeah, we could. But I have a tendency to take this stuff and then bring it into the modern world, and I take a look at what I was thinking the other day, like, okay, I just got done walking through all these temples. I've had my own experience, which I do every single time. And now I'm back in Seattle, and I'm looking at our tall towers. I'm looking at what we build, and I'm looking at the effect upon us, our consciousness, and what it is that people face every day. And you made a comment before the break about these frequencies, 112 hertz, which switches the left brain to the right brain. We're not building those kinds of structures, are we?
No, and in fact, part of the reason why we have so much sick building syndrome, as they call it, is because the rooms and cubicles that we live in, they're basically not designed going around in a very slow, methodical way, which literally just deadens their energy. So if they're deadening the energy of the atoms within your space, it's going to have an effect on you. And of course, you've got the chemicals in the carpets. You've got the air that gets recycled. That doesn't help either. But I've worked with architects around America who actually do go around studying things like Gothic cathedrals, which is essentially how the Europeans built pyramids in the 12th century. They couldn't do pyramids because they get burnt at the stake. So they designed Gothic buildings instead, and they are designed exactly in the same way as any ancient temple. And you go into the Gothic cathedral and you go, wow, this is different. Because it's that effect, you see. It's the positioning of the pillars, the spatial arranging of one room to the next, the positioning of the altar relative to the nave and the apse. All of these things are designed to affect your senses, and they go back to work. And there's one friend of mine in Massachusetts who actually designs normal people's houses. So it's a standard 3-4 bedroom house in the suburbs. And you know what? People do never want to sell the house because they feel so good in it that only if they, out of necessity and desperation, will they actually sell the building, because they feel there's something very positive about it. They feel pleasant there. And he won't tell them. He will not divulge a secret. And he does design the rooms and everything in a certain way that has the correct ratios, which does bring a certain harmony into your life. And you know, it was kind of from that where I kind of developed the concept of the temple making concept, which you mentioned earlier. I used to do workshops, full-day workshops, to teach you how to build your own temple. And you think, well, I don't feel like building a pyramid in my backyard. Well, you don't have to. It can be a set of stones, or it can be a very simple set of crystals within your living room. I mean, right now, when I'm speaking to you from Portland, Maine, I'm in an apartment. I'm sitting within a pentagonal temple. There is a temple hardwired into my living room, and people will not see it. It's very clever, but they can feel it. And the one place that they always gravitate to when they walk in is exactly a corner of one of my sofas. And I know exactly why they're going there, because the geometry is enticing you to go exactly right there. And they feel great. They don't know why, but they feel really good. So this is a very practical magic that I learned on my travels observing temples and figuring out how can we do this for the modern era. So there are people around, architects, who understand the concept of the ancient designs and their principles, and they're hardwiring it into buildings which do make us feel better. So you know, there is hope. It's out there.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm encouraging the listeners, you know, to get some of Freddy's materials and come out Saturday to the East West Bookshop and be in his workshops, because I think you're doing 2 of them, aren't you? Kind of.
Yeah, I figured if I'm going to fly all the way across the country, I might as well make myself useful. And I also did it in December to guarantee that everybody shows up, because, you know, weather's an interesting conundrum in Seattle. So, no, there'll be 2 presentations which are, they're interlinked, but they're quite different. I'm going to talk about the temple as a place of initiation. In fact, the most secret initiation that was done in the temple. And it will also explain why so many of them have been called burial chambers. No one has ever been buried there. It's all a metaphor. So that'll be surprising. And then in the afternoon, if everybody's still alive and awake, they're going to get a second hit, which will be to do with what we were discussing earlier, this big cataclysm 11,000 years ago, missing lands, and the ancient architects who build the structures that we love today. So it's going to be 2 overlapping and yet very different presentations. So can't wait.
Good. Well, I'm just letting everyone know I'll be there, so you can hang out with Freddie and me. I don't know if that matters, but you know.
I better get security involved.
But if you do want to come out, check it out at East West Bookshop, and I highly recommend it. And then I'm highly recommending all of Freddy Silva's materials, and you're going to just learn so many things and be transported. We have so much that we could talk about, but I want to ask you a question, because having just come back from Egypt and then taking a look at your Divine Blueprint book, who are what are the followers of Horus? Can you talk about that?
Oh, yes. Yeah. They're very important. In fact, they're going to take center stage in the next book. The followers of Horus is essentially, or to call them by their real name, the Aku Shemsu Hor. They literally means shining ones, followers of Horus. And they are basically the prodigy of the gods who basically survived the flood. And they were already around in Egypt in 10,400 BC. The lineage goes back 36,000 years, according to the Egyptians. They also appear in Sumeria. They appear in North America with the Hopi. They appear, in the Yucatan in South America, and also in many of the Pacific Islands. In fact, I was just talking to a wisdom keeper, the last wisdom keeper of Tongareva. You'll never find it on the map. It's a tiny island in the middle of nowhere in the Pacific. And he places these people in the middle of the Pacific 11,000 years ago. So these are the part of a brotherhood that went around the world, literally telling us how to conduct ourselves properly, how to build sacred space, how to design perfect structures, how to do crops and crop rotation, and also how to domesticate animals, all the wonderful things that bring us civilization, but more importantly, how you also develop the soul. So they were part of this ongoing brotherhood, which is still going around today. And we call them by different names because depending on the politics of the era, they keep changing their names. We know them today as Scottish Rite Freemasonry. Not the other Freemasons, which this is Scottish Rite. The Scottish Rite trace their lineage all the way back to the flood. Very interesting group of people. In fact, I've spoken at the Scottish Rite in Seattle. Lovely people. Love to do it again. And they also are the Druids. They are the Essenes. So they keep changing their names throughout history. But you know what? They always seem to wear the same long tunics, long white tunics, and it's the same dress that they were wearing back in Egypt 11,000 years ago. Nothing new under the sun. So we have these, essentially it's a academy of people who go around the world by various different names, but they're all fulfilling exactly the same function. The one term that they always use around the world for them is called the Watchers, because they're saying, well, we can watch, we can instruct, but we can't directly intervene in human affairs. It's our job to basically give you a little hand up when you need it, and then you have to do the work, which I totally believe in. This whole thing that we're going to be taken over by aliens is ridiculous because, we've incarnated for a reason. If we let someone else do the work for us, it defeats the purpose of being here in the first place. So these are very helpful guides that, and they say, whenever you need our help, we're always happy to help you in your dreams, in your prayers, when you go to temples. But it's our job to help you and assist you because we know how difficult it is to be down here. We've done it. We know how difficult it is to be in the human body. So we're more than glad to help. The trick is you've got to ask us because we can't unless you actually ask us. That's what we call the Watchers. So there's a bit of a humor in there as well. But so they're still around. In the Christian ethos, they were eventually called the guardian angels. And believe me, they are very much real.
I love what you're saying. Yeah, like I said, there's a lot I could ask about that, but this idea that the followers of Horus are all over the world, and there's this wings of the falcon sort of an idea, and even when I was at Angkor Wat 2 years ago, that kind of a thing. I'm sort of being with, like I think I have time for maybe one more quick question. Which is like,
actually, I'm glad you brought up Angkor Wat because you know what Angkor actually means.
Yeah, no.
Angkor literally means the Horus lives. It's an Egyptian name. It's not a Cambodian name. It's an Egyptian name. And the center of the temple of Angkor, relative to the Great Pyramid of Giza, is exactly 72 degrees. That's one of the numbers that they used to line up the temples. So we're talking something very, very old and designed here.
Oh, that kind of stopped me in my tracks just a little bit. That's an amazing piece of information. I definitely want to know more about that. When we talk about, the art of resurrection, and we've got like 1 minute, the art of resurrection or a consciousness, can you make one last comment about that? And then we're going to be out of time.
Yeah, I mean, the concept of resurrection has been completely hijacked by the Christian community. They've got it completely wrong. When you actually look at the early Christian people who were Gnostic Christians, they totally talk about the personal resurrection of the soul while you live, not when you die. You don't get nailed to a cross physically. The whole story of Jesus was a complete metaphor, but Jesus was a real person. He was following a very, very ancient tradition that goes back to Japan in 8000 BC, about the initiate having a personal living resurrection. It was the highest level of initiation, and that was conducted at some of the temples around the world. In fact, that's what I'll be discussing on Saturday.
Wonderful.
So it's part of a very old secret tradition of actually elevating the soul while you live, so you become an ascended being while you're actually in the body on Earth. Not when you die, when you're living. It's the best held secret in the universe.
That sounds fantastic. So my guest today is Freddy Silva. Check out his new book, The Divine Blueprint, and come out this Saturday. That's the day after tomorrow, by the way, to East West Bookshop, 10 to noon, and then 2 to 4. He has 2 workshops. I'll be there. Find out more about Freddy Silva at invisibletemple.com, and find out more about me, Loretta Brown, at ReikiOasis.com and the LorettaBrownShow.com, and have a great week.
The views expressed on this program are those of the host, guest,